My name is Elena Brooks, and for most of my life, I've existed quietly on the edges of my own family. I'm 40 years old now, an age where people assume you've figured yourself out, where stability is mistaken for fulfillment. If you asked my relatives to describe me, they'd use words like dependable, reserved, or the sensible one. No one would say essential. No one ever has. I built my life carefully, methodically, brick by brick, the way you build something you don't want to collapse. I own a small accounting firm downtown. It isn't glamorous, but it's reliable. Numbers don't lie, don't mock you when you're vulnerable. Don't twist your intentions into punchlines. Numbers behave. People rarely do. Most evenings, I return to my apartment just as the sun slips behind the buildings. I take off my heels, make a cup of tea, and sit in silence that feels deserved. Peace, when earned, has a different texture. I do have a boyfriend. His name is Marcus. He travels often for work, which might be why we work. He understands space. Once, while listening to me vent about my family, he said gently, "You don't owe anyone access to you just because you share blood." I smiled at the time, changed the subject. I wasn't ready to hear it. Family for me has always been complicated, especially when it comes to my sister Marlene. Marlene is 6 years older than me. She's strong in a way that looks heroic from the outside and exhausting up close. Her son Dylan is 20 now. His father disappeared before Dylan was old enough to remember faces. Marlene stepped into every role without hesitation: provider, defender, excuse maker. She loved him fiercely, desperately, and without limits. I never blamed her for how hard it was. I blamed her for what she refused to see. Dylan was loud growing up. At first, it was charming. He was funny, quick-witted, the kid who filled awkward silences. People laughed around him, teachers tolerated him, relatives praised his confidence. But somewhere along the way, humor sharpened into something else. He learned early that laughs came faster when someone else was the target. Family dinners slowly transformed into informal roast sessions, and Dylan always stood comfortably at the center. No one stopped him. When he joked about our uncle's weight, people laughed. When he mocked a cousin's job, the laughter grew louder. When he commented on my life, single, childless, devoted to spreadsheets, the laughter became effortless. "She's married to numbers," he'd say, grinning. Guess some people peak at Excel. I learned to smile thinly, to speak less, to offer fewer pieces of myself to a room that treated them like entertainment. Still, hope has a way of surviving where it shouldn't. When Dylan's 20th birthday approached, I made a decision I would later question 1,000 times. I needed, to believe kindness could still redirect someone before it was too late. Dylan had been saving for a truck, working warehouse shifts and odd jobs. He talked about it constantly. I convinced myself that something substantial, something earned yet given, might teach him responsibility. That stability might replace entitlement. So I kept it to myself. A week before his birthday, I walked into a dealership alone, signed the papers alone, paid in full without telling a single person. A brand new black pickup. I watched as they detailed it under bright lights, imagining his reaction: shock, gratitude, maybe even humility. I told myself this wasn't about approval. But deep down, I wanted proof that generosity still mattered. The night of the birthday dinner, Marlene's house was its usual chaos. Lasagna baking too long, garlic bread burning at the edges, balloons drooping against the ceiling, laughter echoing through walls soaked in years of noise. When it came time for gifts, I handed Dylan a small box. Inside were only the keys. He stared at them, confused, then he rushed outside. Everyone followed. The truck sat under the streetlight at the end of the block, gleaming like it didn't belong to our lives. Dylan stopped short. His expression flickered. Shock, pride, disbelief. For a brief moment, I thought I saw something else. Gratitude. We went back inside. That's when Dylan grabbed his beer. He lifted the bottle and said loudly, "Guess my idiot aunt thought she could buy respect with money." The room froze. Then laughter broke out. Not nervous laughter, not uncomfortable laughter, real laughter, easy, familiar. Even my grandmother chuckled. Something inside me shut down, not with anger, but with a precise clinical cold. I stood up. I didn't argue, I didn't cry, I didn't defend myself. I grabbed my coat and walked out. No one followed me. That night, I didn't rage or fall apart. I replayed the moment over and over, realizing something far more painful than the insult itself. They didn't just tolerate his cruelty. They enjoyed it. At 6:13 a.m., my phone started vibrating. By 7:30, there were dozens of missed calls. Messages stacked on top of one another, urgency replacing humor. When Marlene finally texted, "Where's the truck?" I understood exactly what they were worried about. I didn't respond. I let the phone vibrate itself into silence while I stood in my kitchen, staring at steam rising from a mug of tea I wasn't drinking. It wasn't anger that held me still. It was clarity. And sometime before dawn, I knew exactly what I was going to do next. Sometime after 3 in the morning, I finally moved. The apartment was wrapped in that deep, suspended quiet that only exists before dawn. I pulled on a hoodie, slipped into my shoes without bothering to tie them, and drove toward Marlene's neighborhood. I turned my headlights off a block away, not because I was hiding, but because I didn't want to announce myself. The truck was still there, parked neatly in the driveway, untouched, gleaming faintly beneath the porch light, as if waiting for permission to belong. I sat in my car for a full minute, my heart calm in a way that surprised me. There was no rush of adrenaline, no fear, just certainty. I got out, unlocked the door, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. I pulled away slowly, quiet enough not to wake anyone, deliberate enough to feel like reclaiming something that had never truly been given. Back in my garage, I shut off the tracking app connected to Dylan's phone, disconnected the battery, and draped a tarp over the truck. The sound of the fabric settling felt final, like closing a file. If I didn't exist to him, then fine. I wouldn't exist. By morning, the messages had turned vicious. "You're insane. You had no right. This is pathetic." I didn't reply. At 9:02 a.m., tires screeched into my driveway. I looked through the window just in time to see Marlene's car parked crookedly, like it hadn't fully decided to stop. Dylan jumped out, slamming the door so hard the mirror rattled. He didn't knock. He pounded. 5 minutes straight. I opened the door because I knew he wouldn't leave until I did. He pushed past me as if my space were optional. "You're delusional," he snapped. "You think that truck was about me? It was about you trying to feel important." His voice was loud, sharp, rehearsed. Even now it felt like a performance. "No husband, no kids, just spreadsheets and a quiet apartment," he continued. "You needed someone to depend on you." I felt something tighten in my chest, but I didn't interrupt. Then he smiled, that familiar, cruel smile. "Sad Aunt Elena." The sound came before the thought. The slap wasn't hard, it wasn't dramatic, but it was loud enough to end the moment. Dylan staggered back, stunned. Not because it hurt, but because I'd done it at all. "Get out," I said. My voice didn't shake. "Now." He waited for tears, for regret, for collapse. None came. He left without another word, slamming the door behind him. I stood there afterward, hands trembling, heart racing, but I didn't cry. I didn't feel weak. I felt finished. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Marlene's voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Was Dylan at your house?" "Yes." There was a pause. "He crashed," she said quietly. He'd sped through a yellow light on wet pavement, lost control, and clipped a stop sign. Her car was wrecked. Dylan walked away with bruises. It wasn't even his first accident. That afternoon, Marlene came over. She sat stiffly on my couch, her purse clenched in her lap like a lifeline. She didn't touch the tea I offered. "I don't think he deserves it," she said finally. "I don't think he deserves anything right now." She stayed nearly an hour. No excuses, no defending him. Just one sentence that landed heavier than everything else. I think I really messed this up. For the first time in years, I believed her. Dylan didn't come home after the crash. Instead, he went to Aunt Valerie. Valerie welcomed him without hesitation. She lived in a creaky house filled with wind chimes, crystals on every windowsill, and the constant smell of sage. She spoke in soft affirmations and believed consequences were optional if someone was hurting. "He just needs love right now," she texted Marlene, followed by a heart emoji. 3 days later, Valerie called again. Her voice was tighter this time. "He stays out late," she said. "Comes home blasting music at 2 in the morning like I don't exist." When she asked him to help with groceries, he said he wasn't in the mood. When she asked him to vacuum, he snapped back, "I'm not your kid." The final straw came when Valerie's back pain flared and she asked for help in the yard. He laughed, told her to hire someone. "I've never been spoken to like that in my own home," she said quietly. "Not even when I was a teacher." She gave him a week. Meanwhile, the truck sat under a tarp in my garage. battery disconnected like a sealed regret. Sometimes I'd find myself standing there, remembering the boy who once helped me plant tomatoes for an entire afternoon without being asked. One evening, Marlene stood in the garage doorway, staring at the covered shape. "Take it back," she said. "Don't ever give him something that big again. He has to earn it at least once." I called the dealership the next morning and arranged the return. I didn't argue about the fees. They felt small compared to the weight lifting off my chest. That night, Valerie showed up at my door, shaken. "He left," she said. "Middle of the night, no note." Hours later, my phone rang. FaceTime. Dylan's face filled the screen, reckless and grinning. He was driving my truck. "Guess you forgot about the spare key," he laughed, angling the camera toward the dashboard. My stomach dropped. I begged him to pull over, told him we could talk, told him this wasn't funny. He didn't listen. The screen went black with the sound of screeching tires. Minutes later, the call came. The truck was totaled. Dylan survived with minor injuries. At the hospital, he wouldn't look at me, wouldn't look at Marlene either. A nurse later told Marlene he'd whispered that I'd taken everything from him. That's when I understood something terrifying and clear. Dylan truly believed he was the victim. Dylan was discharged from the hospital the next morning. He went back to Marlene's house for a few hours, long enough to shower, change his clothes, and collect whatever still felt like it belonged to him. He didn't apologize. He didn't mention the truck. He didn't say thank you. By mid-afternoon, he was gone again. This time, Marlene didn't chase him. She didn't call relatives or send frantic messages. She sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold in her hands and let the silence exist where panic usually lived. When she told me later, her voice sounded unfamiliar, steady, stripped of excuses. "I didn't go after him," she said quietly. "I just stayed." Days passed. Then a photo appeared in the family group chat. Dylan sprawled across a friend's couch, holding up a peace sign, smirking as if the last few weeks had been nothing more than a joke. Someone reacted with a laughing emoji. No one else did. 2 weeks later, that same friend asked him to leave after another outburst. The pattern repeated faster this time. Shorter stays, less patience, burned bridges with no one rushing in to rebuild them. One night, Marlene called me. Her voice was low, not panicked. "He's run out of places to go," she said. She didn't ask me to take him in. She didn't ask how I felt. She didn't ask what we should do. That was how I knew something had finally changed. 3 days later, Dylan showed up at my office. Not yelling, not joking. He looked smaller, weighed down in a way exhaustion alone can't explain. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes dulled by consequences he couldn't outrun anymore. "Can we talk?" he asked. I led him into my office and closed the door. He didn't sit at first, just stood there, hands in his pockets like he wasn't sure he'd earned the chair. "I started therapy," he said finally. "A free clinic, it's hard." I didn't respond. "They told me I don't get to decide how my actions affect people," he continued. "I always thought I did. I thought if I was hurting, it made everything else okay." His voice cracked, not theatrically, just enough to be honest. "I want to pay you back," he said. "For the truck. I got a job at a garage. I'll send what I can." He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He wasn't asking for another chance. He was offering accountability. "I'm not rescuing you," I said carefully. "And I'm not punishing you either." He nodded like he'd expected nothing less. After he left, I stayed in my office longer than usual. I thought about Marcus, about what he'd said years ago, about access and boundaries. Love without limits doesn't heal. It excuses. Dylan went to Marlene next. She didn't hug him. She didn't cry. She listened. Then she said, "Wanting to change isn't the same as changing." He accepted that too. Over the months that followed, something different happened. He stayed consistent. Therapy continued. Screenshots of pay stubs arrived without prompting. Small payments came with no explanations attached. He moved into a cramped room above the garage and handled his own life. Rent, food, consequences. He still made mistakes. But this time he owned them. Marlene and I found space again. Real space. We talked about things that weren't Dylan. She admitted she'd built her entire identity around fixing him and how empty that had left her. Later, Dylan agreed to meet his father. Not for reconciliation, but for clarity, and only in a therapy session. That alone told me how far he'd come. Almost a year passed. Dylan still didn't have a car. He hadn't paid me back fully. I didn't care. What mattered was that he showed up. One session, one paycheck, one honest decision at a time. The last time I saw him, he asked quietly, "Do you think we're okay now?" I thought about it, really thought. "We're getting there," I said. And for the first time in my life, that felt like enough.